the Iron Lady, I really do recommend it. It's the most wonderful film with Meryl Streep playing the role of Margaret Thatcher. She was a pretty tough, a pretty forthright lady. I'm not sure I would necessarily wish to be married to her because she was very bossy, but she had very determined ideas about what she wanted. And she believed that the private sector could do no wrong and the public sector could do no right. And therefore her plan was to push out everything from the public sector into the private sector. And indeed I worked for her in the Cabinet Office in 1981-82 on the privatisation programme. And I went to see her and I said, Prime Minister, I've been working on the water industry and I think it's the one industry you shouldn't privatise. And she said, my boy, you know, civil servants can't run industries. Would you like to please rethink your recommendations and come and see me again? The privatisation of the water industry has been one of the great successes in the UK, which shows how much I was wrong and she was right. Now, the great thing about public-private partnerships is it operates very well, where the public sector has a role which it can't avoid. When you're thinking about roads and ports and railways, you can't completely leave it up to the private sector these days. You could in the 19th century, but not today. There is a public perception that the state has to be involved. And of course, it really does have to be involved because it tends to give the permissions as a result of which ports can be built and roads can be built and airports can be sited. But the great thing about involving the private sector is very often the private sector can do it more efficiently, can manage the project better, can bring finance to bear at a pretty reasonable rate, and of course that doesn't hit the public sector borrowing, which today is the focus of so much attention by the IMF and the European Central Bank on countries that have over-borrowed. So as a result of good old Mrs. Thatcher, the UK has an extensive track record of infrastructure through PPP. In fact, something like 900 PPP contracts worth over 70 billion, just in the UK alone. And the sectors have ranged from transport and health and education and housing and the environment. And the UK has had a lot of experience at delivering these projects in both the UK and it's now been, of course, exported around the world. Could I have the next slide, please? The key thing is that the responsibility and the controllable risk must be transferred to the private partner. Now, I've added the word controllable in here because if you're relying on the government to give you planning permission to build a port or an airport or a road, clearly you're not in control of that particular risk. And so it's only the controllable risks which should be transferred to the private sector who can then do something about it. And the private partner must be responsible for the contract life over a reasonable period so that the return can be made on the investment. The private partner will often design and build and finance and operate and then maintain. And it will also be given the authority to ensure it has a revenue stream. A revenue stream either from the fees paid on the toll road or for the port or access to an airport, or alternatively by a fixed annual arrangement in terms of a payment from the state, for example, for a hospital or a school. But the authority, the state, must have the authority to penalise the private sector if the standard of quality required in the PPP contract is not actually adhered to. So terribly important to build in penalties into a PPP contract. Each project, of course, must be tailored, but there must be a robust, very robust contractual framework underlying it. Next one, please. We've done it already. Well done. Now, most countries have adopted the UK's PPP framework. It's very well established now. In Canada, France, a lot of the high-speed trains, for example, have been under PPP contracts. Germany and Australia. and also in Europe, in Finland, Norway, and Slovakia. Some recent projects in China have included, in Russia, have included the high-speed rail, in Czechoslovakia, a road project, in Poland, the toll road. So this is becoming quite a popular way for countries to actually get the finance off their balance sheet and actually then use private expertise. Now, one of the lessons we learned from the adoption, well, number one, significant political commitment is the starting point. Unless you get that, you don't begin. I took a business delegation to Mexico when I was Lord Mayor, and President Calderon said, I want to do this PPP, and before you leave your visit, I'd like to have one project which we're just about signed up. And sure enough, before we left, an oyster card project for a railway in Mexico City was just about agreed, before we even left from our 2-day visit. So if you've got political commitment, it works. If the president or the minister says we're going to do this, then it will happen. And I'm very pleased that President Nazarbayev has included this right up at the top of the list of his priorities. And your minister, your involvement in this, I'm sure it's going to be pushed forward, many of these projects. Second, you need a clear, transparent legal framework. Now, this is a bit of a problem where in countries the legal system is not as robust as it might be. And we have seen this in Kazakhstan over the years. Let's not beat about the bush. Contracts which have been renegotiated and so on during the course of the life of a particular project. You cannot do that with a PPP project. Once you've signed something, you've got to keep to it. And yes, you can introduce penalties if people are not performing, but you can't keep changing contracts. And I think that's a very clear message when you are introducing PPP if you want it to be successful. The private partners, of course, will prioritize the project appeal to them, but in many cases the market entry costs are quite high, and therefore it's a good idea to have a large number of projects in the pipeline. And the risk allocation should balance, on the one hand, the best value you can get, but also the attractiveness to the international partner. And so we come back to where is Kazakhstan at the moment in the history of this subject. I first got involved in discussions of PPP in Kazakhstan over 7 years ago, when a consultancy project was undertaken and was not paid for by the Kazakhstan government. When I then became Lord Mayor in 2007, and I brought a delegation to Kazakhstan, I wanted to put PPP on the list. And nobody was interested in the UK. They said, well, we didn't pay 2 years ago, so why should we come now and try again? But we did get it on the list, actually, and we did talk about it, but not very much happened. And so, certainly in the UK, the enthusiasm for Kazakhstan as a venue for PPP is pretty low at the present point in time. But I think things are changing. I think things are changing for a number of reasons. First of all, you've got an excellent PPP centre at the moment. So much. I'm most impressed having met you and your colleagues. You know what it's all about now. You have new legal framework which you've developed. Very, very important. Thirdly, you have the president saying this is important. And then fourthly, Kazakhstan, like many other countries, is actually short of finance to do these infrastructure projects. Fifthly, if you were at the Foreign Investors Council meeting this morning, everyone was talking about infrastructure. The EBRD, the ADB, that was on everybody's lips. So there's a bit of a bandwagon going at the moment. And I'm going to make sure when I go back to London, I talk about the PPP opportunities in Kazakhstan at the moment, because they are there. Now, we have an image and we have a communication problem. A survey was released this morning which showed that it's all about the position of Kazakhstan as a place to invest in the CIS. 85% of the people that had invested in Kazakhstan said it was the best place in the CIS in which to invest. For those people that hadn't invested in Kazakhstan, only 15 people said it was the best place to invest. So you have an image problem here, you have a communications problem. And what is really required is as soon as we get these first few projects actually done and We have to shout it from the rooftops, and we say these have been a huge success, and here are some more in the pipeline which we can do. And we have to go on conferences and meetings in London, for example, and Paris and Frankfurt and all around Europe, talking about these success stories. Now, of course, I'm afraid it's not a great time in Europe to be talking about financing things and borrowing things. Everybody's broke. You know, the Greeks and the Spaniards and the Italians. But this isn't the end of the world. There is money around for good projects. There is money around where the return is reasonable, providing, of course, one can reduce the uncertainty. And so that's what it's really all about. It's actually deciding on what the project is, making sure it's a viable project, reducing the uncertainty behind that project, ensuring a sensible rate of return, and then once you've done that, then I think we will see PPP in Kazakhstan becoming an extremely successful way of financing, operating, managing the infrastructure projects. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sir John Stewart. I would advise all the participants, if they get a hold of your presentation, to put the third slide at the wall with 5. I think important items: political commitment, transparent legal framework, a private appeal, a pipeline of projects, and a sound risk allocation. It sounds easy, but it takes years to get there. And your experience is very valuable in this discussion. So thank you again for sharing that, your experience and your message to Kazakhstan to make PPP also here successful and make it happen. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce the last speaker of this session before we go to the discussion session, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Lee Hung-ho he is the ambassador of the International Economic Trade and Trade Topic for the Republic of Korea, and he will elaborate on the introduction of successful public-private partnerships and the lessons learned. And South Korea is really very much experienced on this topic. Mr. Ho, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad and privileged to be here and to share the Korean experiences of public-private partnership. I have to confess I am not an expert in it, but I summarize the overall picture of PPP in Korea and try to draw some implication from Kazakhstan. Public-private